I'll do the research on the catalogue in the weeks leading up to the sale. I'll mark out numbers that I'm particularly interested in, and then some that you could make a case for if you like the horse. You can love a yearling, and then you walk in and it makes 300,000, and the Arabs have bought it. And you feel it's a bit embarrassing to have had the fella on the phone.
I'm Jess Stafford, and over the last few weeks we've been speaking to a variety of trainers, bloodstock agents and syndicate members about the breeze up sales.
You know, you're trying to buy an athlete. I mean, that horse was like a store, really, you know, but he was doing stuff as a 2-year-old, so it ticks all boxes, you know, win-win.
In this 3-part mini-series, we'll be asking them why the breeze up sells, what they're looking for, and their insightful ways of finding the best value for money. Today we welcome one of the busiest bloodstock agents in the industry. There's not an auction that Anthony Bromley is not at, whether he's trying to find some of the sharpest 2-year-olds for the likes of Eve Johnson Horton, or the best hurdlers and chasers for the double green of Simon Muir and Isaac Swade and others. But today we're here to talk about breeze ups and a role that you've played a very big part of, especially with the likes of Alan King, and a niche industry for you, but a very successful one. So as I've asked all of our interviewees over the course of the series, Anthony, why the breeze ups for you?
Well, it was an angle with Alan wanted to. He wasn't a big fan of summer jumping, and needed to keep something rolling through the summer to keep the staff busy and all that sort of stuff. So he sort of wanted to go down the line of having some more flat horses, and we sort of discussed it, and really buying flat yearlings in the autumn didn't really suit his setup because he was full with jumpers all through the winter. And I did suggest, well, why don't we look at getting a few breeze ups, but get them, you know, either at the April sale or you go into the May. And he said, oh, May's better, because again, the jumpers would be getting turned out. So he was quite keen on that. And so I think the first one we bought breeze up wise would have been about 10 years ago, and it was Chates, and it was actually from the same vendor, Thomas Demara, who ended up we bought Trueshan from. But Chates was a good horse. He got to a rating of 100 and something, just over 100. He won the B Lincoln one year and stuff like that. But he was a grand horse, and you know, and he was 20 grand, and there was a little bit of a jumper in the Pedigree and stuff like that. And but he ended up being better at a mile and one. But and he did jump, but he was a better flat horse. So
was it a timing thing in terms of where they fall in the calendar year, but also was it a time in Alan's sort of business project life where he was thinking, what else can I do to sort of make my year make sense?
Yeah,
really?
And that was really what it was. He'd sort of finally given up on the idea he was going to be champion jumps trainer. He was just going to do, you know, the numbers and the amount of money to invest to get the right level of jumpers to be competing at the top end all the time. It was just getting a bit crazy, and this was an avenue where as I said to him, we could spend sensibly and buy a nice little project horse, and that's what we started doing.
And so, with all the sales that you go to that you're very, very familiar with, what is it about breeze ups that you thought might work in terms of the kind of horse that you could get? Because we are very used to getting fast horses that are based on time. What did you think that you could really corner?
Well, it was trying to think outside the box a little bit. And I'm thinking, well, no one's going there and buying the backward one, because the breeze up boys do try and buy, yes, a little sharp one. That was the old school thought. But they were also just buying nice horses with a bit of size and scope that would go on. And if they got a time, they could still get big prices. But we weren't really looking for a horse that could run a very sharp 2 furlongs. We were looking for a horse that was going to make a 3-year-old. And with a plan B up our sleeve that, yes, if they can get a mile and a quarter as a 3-year-old, then they could make juvenile hurdlers as well. But ultimately, you're trying to buy a nice flat horse first and foremost, but with a bit of size and scope. And, you know, and it's been a good... You know, the blueprint's been copied by a few other people, but it's like, you know, we still, you know, like doing it, you know. So, with that in mind, we've spoken to plenty of other agents and other trainers, and the necessity wanting horses that are fast, horses that will be instant. What was your initial approach to the breeze ups, and how has that evolved in terms of finding the horses? You talk about the size of them and being a little bit more backward, but does it begin with looking at the pedigrees, or how does it all match up? Yeah, I think you do look at the pedigrees, because there's no need to have to look at some of the if they're just not going to suit what we're looking for. So, you know, a 5 furlong sire out of a 5 furlong pedigree, you know, really that's not going to be for us. So, yes, I will mark out the catalogue. I'll do the research on the catalogue in the weeks leading up to the sale. I'll mark out numbers that I'm particularly interested in, and then some that you could make a case for if you like the horse. So you have a broader list, but you don't have to look at every. Whereas at yearling sales, I try to look at virtually every yearling I possibly can. At the breeder sales, I don't need to look at every horse for the Alan King order, as it were. And so you can cut your catalogue down, and then you mark them out on your. You get the breeze up running order, and you highlight up all the ones you definitely need to see, and you'll watch them all because they're coming up all at the same time. But you will, you know, highlight the ones which you're particularly interested in to see how they move, and listen to their wind as well as they're going past. And you know, it's not a crazy sale for me because you go to store sales and you do the flat unit sales, and it's a real big numbers situation, and you have to get around so many. The breeder sales is a tighter set of numbers. You've got time to see all the horses. I find them quite, you know, they're a more relaxing sale than most. Let's put it that way.
And so when you're looking at the breeze itself, is it for you, what is it that you're looking for, knowing, how can you look at a 2-year-old and think that's going to make a better 3-year-old?
I don't know, really. I suppose it's instinctive. You don't like the real scratchy actioned horses. You want a horse who's, you know, showing a good temperament, you know, ears are pricked, it's not having its, you know, scrubbed along and this, that, and the other. You want to see a horse with an even stride. You just get an impression. And I don't feel, you know, time it obviously is important, and I can see that, but really it only clouds your judgment. Yeah, I remember doing breeze up sale years ago, and we did get a set of the times, and Stuart Williams did say to me, "You want to get rid of those, chap." He said, because the way you buy them is you buy as an individual a horse you like and that one has caught your eye, and if you start looking at times, it'll influence where you buy the horses. And I did it for one sale, and I didn't do very well at that sale because I'd stopped myself buying some horses because they had really slow times. And I went back to Stuart a couple of years later and I said, "You were so right. I should stick." He said, "I told you, that's not how you want, it's not the sort of thing you're looking to buy. If you're trying to buy something to run over 4 or 5 furlongs, then fine." But yeah, so look, you're aware at the sales of what's done fast times because the vendors will tell you quite quickly if they're in the top 10 time. And if they're a 16-1 big scopy horse with a bit of staying pedigree in there, and then they tell you it's in the top 10 time because the vendor will soon tell you if it has, then it's going to be crazy money. And actually that's how, I mean, Native Trail was a lovely horse, and you know, as soon as he'd done a nice time, he was going to be well out of our league, and he was very good. And
with that in mind, if there was a big backward-looking type physically and it does do a really fast time and it sort of doesn't really make sense, would that sort of worry you about, you know, if it's overdone too much at the early stage of its career?
Have to see, you'd have to know the vendor a little bit, that if you don't want a horse that's absolutely got eyes on stalks and wired to the moon, but obviously, as I say, Native Trail was a perfect example. He shouldn't have been able to clock a decent time, but he clearly had so much talent for a 16-3 big scopy horse. He would have definitely been. He was on our wish list, but we just knew it was. You know, once he'd done the times, he wasn't going to fall through the cracks. Yeah.
So, for the last 10 years, it's been a sort of a really fun project area that has created lots of brilliant success stories, and we'll go through the likes of the Trueshans and the Tritonics and what they've come and done for you going forward. But how has other sort of interests changed the way that you see that the sales have shaped? Have you seen a lot more people trying to sort of follow the same approach? Do you think that it's become more competitive in terms of the value that there should be there?
There's other jumps trainers I've seen coming to the sales the last few years. But they're still sort of, yeah. I mean, there are more of those type of horses now have popped up in the breeze up sales because the breeze up boys have also seen there is a market for that type of horse. So they don't just buy the 5 furlong type. So they do buy a few, and with the yearling sales being so strong, they have to find angles. and this hasn't been a bad angle. You know, buying a 1.25 mile type of horse for the breeze up, there is a market for it, and they soon cottoned on that Kingy liked buying at the Guineas sale because that fitted him dates-wise. And literally within 1 year, there was a whole heap of those type of horses being, you know, they would bring them, the consigners soon worked it out, and they started bringing those type of horses to the Guineas sale, for example. And yeah, I'd say other people have done it as well, and you know, and had some success too. But you know, it's each to their own. So
the supply and demand is there, which is good to see, considering that the prices of breeze ups, as we've seen at sort of plenty of the sales, are going through the roof, and they're becoming very expensive. But there's the amount of opportunities for you continues to be at a good rate, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think we certainly get a nice enough list going into the day of the sale each year, so I'm hopeful it'll be the same again this year. And
you obviously, we touched on the yearling sales. You'd like to see every single yearling, as many as that you can. So are there plenty that you mark down and say, that'd be interesting as a breeze up? I'd like to follow that in, and especially once you've seen that they've been bought by the right people.
No, I often bump into a few breeze up boys and say, look, I haven't got an order for this, but I've seen a yearling down there that you really should get, because I think Kingy and I love it next year. And because at the end of the day, the guys, you know, we see each other every day at these sales for months. So you actually get to know the consigners, you know, the vendors and stuff, you know, for the breeze up. But they're obviously buyers in the marketplace when you're there at the yearling sales, and I'm buying for other clients at that time. But Kingy isn't looking for yearlings, but there'll be sort of certain horses there that I'll say to, you know, fellas I like, that, you know, I said, look, if you get that horse, I'm not saying I'll definitely buy it, but I said, that's the sort of horse I like. And they go, you know, and it's because, yeah, it'd be nice, you know, because that's the sort of thing. But I'm not in a position really I hadn't got a client for him in October, so.
So it's a tried and tested approach, although it was great to see that Bradsell, your own pin hooking story, that has worked well.
Yeah.
Was that something, went from a 12,000 guineas yearling into a 47,000 pound 2-year-old, I see. Is that something that, because you have gone through this and you've seen horses that have done well, is that something, how did that happen?
Well, Bradsell, so I bought 4 yearlings for Harry Dunlop that year, and Bradsell was one, Polly Pot another who won the May Hill for Harry, and then there was another one that won, and the 4th one didn't. But Harry couldn't get Bradsell sold, and Mark Grant was breaking all his yearlings in and kept saying this 12 grand buy was as nice as any of the ones he'd got, and he had some expensive ones there. And he said to Harry, if you haven't sold it, we should breeze this up. Well, and poor, you know, so Harry did that. And so Harry and Mark Grant breezed it up, and he made 47 at Doncaster. And you know, when they were content with that, but within 6 weeks or a month, it had won at York, and then within about 8-9 weeks, it had won at Royal Ascot. It's such a shame. I think yeah, it might have, these 2 Group 2 winners for, you know, the Coventry winner with Bradsell and Polly Pot, I think they just came just a bit too late in Harry's career to and because he's now retired because he financially couldn't make it work, and really Bradsell was sold because of the financial situation. So it's such a shame. They just came a bit late in his training career, because I love Harry to bits and he can definitely train. It's just didn't happen for him, and just these 2 good 2-year-olds came at the last season rather than a couple of seasons before. Yeah, so it's circumstance that ended up there. Yeah, that wasn't bought to be a breeze up. It was bought to be a 2-year-old for Harry, along with Polly Pot, and if he could have got it sold before December, before Christmas, it would have been in the yard. I see. So the pin hook, so for you being on that side of it is never really been, that was sort of circumstance. No. Yeah, so I'm always buying for trainers and clients at sales.
Yeah. So if we go back to obviously we've talked about the approach and what you're looking for, your main considerations. I've been really interested to hear about the pre and the post breeze, the temperament and that kind of horse that maybe that likes Alan King really needs to find. You know, he needs to find the sort of the ones that will slot into his setup. How easy has it been, that transition from breeze up to going over to Barbary, and how have you found that?
Yeah, so they don't go straight in there. They'll go to Jamie McGee's nearby. It's like a pre-training livery place, just to get them to chill out initially, because you don't want, coming from the sales, you'll get lots of snotty nose and stuff like that, and you're actually full into your flat season by then as well now with the other, you know, the older horses. So you want to get the snots and all those sort of things out of the way. So they'll do 4 to 6 weeks with Jamie, and he's got a little canter there as well. So they get going there, and anything they've picked up from the sales, they'll get rid of by the, you know, but they'll come in a little bit, you know, it's a chill out time because the breezers pretty much rev them up. Mm-hmm. You know, they, and so they come into Alan after about 6 weeks, and then sort of smoothly move into the system. As you say, you hoped you've picked the temperaments all right, and you've hoped that the vendors have given you the right steers. Mm-hmm. On that. You'll get 1 or 2 that are a bit hotter than others, and we might be thinking of gelding 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. Some might have been gelded by now already. There is that, because they're not going to be stallions really. So, and they're going to be later 2-year-olds sort of type. So we might geld some then, but we play it by ear, you know.
And then you can feel like you could start from scratch just a little bit then to bring it on to train horse. Because one of the questions I want to know is that obviously that this is an area to create sort of maybe dual purpose horses or maybe the longer distance types. Why, if you had a new client that came to you to say that we want to find this type of horse, would you suggest this over potentially going to the horse and training sales, for example, and finding a horse that might not have just reached what you think you could develop with it?
Yeah, so yeah, one of the other factors why we went into doing the breezes that way was it's not a bad way to buy your own juvenile hurdlers. Mm-hmm. Because the horse and training sale, if you've got a horse rated 80 with a bit of size and scope, we couldn't afford to buy them either, sort of thing. So they were 100 grand, and but if we'd bought him for 20 or 30 and had him on the flat, had a bit of fun with it, and then developed your own, you could be schooling them up on and off all through the 3-year-old year. So it wasn't like a rush job to get them schooled. So that was another factor there. So you could go to an owner and say, look, you've got the dream for 2 years on the flat, and we've got a plan B up our sleeve as well. So there's a lot of, and give us 30 grand or 40 grand, and, you know, we can have a bit of fun with this. Yeah. And, you know, and so that was the sort of a lot of the raison d'etre behind it. So it was another part there. So, yeah, but some owners are just interested in the flat side of it more, and then some, like the owners we bought Trueshan for, knew when we were buying it, they were more jumpsmen. We bought that one, that horse was bought for 4 guys who were definitely jumpsmen. Yeah. And because we did actually have him written down that if he's not a flat horse, he'd make a hell of a bumper horse. And he did quite well as a flat horse. He didn't need to go jumping.
So that leads us nicely onto some of the biggest success stories coming out of the breeze ups for Anthony Bromley and Alan King. And we have to start with a colt by Planteur. Lot 150 he was back in 2018 for you. And I'd like to start, as you mentioned, you do always start with the pedigrees, or tend to start with the pedigrees anyway. So what was it that...
Well, he was definitely on the list to look at because he was by Planteur. We'd bought one the year before that we liked, and he ended up being called Nebuchadnezzar. And he wasn't a superstar, but actually, as it turned out. But we rather liked him at that stage. He was only still just a 3-year-old. And he was getting, he was a sire that was getting right stamper horses. So he was definitely ringed to go and have a look at. The mare had produced some winners, and there was a bit of stamina in the pedigree, and Planteur was a nice sort of sire we liked. So he was sort of marked up to definitely go and have a look at. And I went and saw him the day before he breezed, because I went and saw Knock and Glasses the day before, and I loved him. He was a really nice looking horse. I mean, he was 16-1, and I did write on my notes, absolutely lovely, great walker, good bone, size and scope. And I wrote on the top and circled it NH, which doesn't now make me sound very clever, but equally, and it was pretty much in my mind that we'd probably buy this horse for someone, but we had to get the right owner. We didn't need to get an owner that was going to look for a 2-year-old, because some of owners would be expecting to have some action as a 2-year-old. This one didn't look like he was going to be a 2-year-old.
Because of the size of him and because of the pedigree?
And then in the breeze, I mean, I remember he had a lovely long stride.
Well, we can have a look now. Let's watch the breeze
I haven't seen this for a few years.
Yeah, so we obviously don't get to see the beginning. We get to see him just jumping off, as we can see. But he obviously handled it all well up until this point, you imagine. And then, here we go. Turn that down. So you can tell us what you see, really, which would be...
Well, I'm told subsequently that he had the slowest time of the breeze of the whole lot. That's what Matt Coleman's told me. which would have probably affected me slightly, but it would have only just, you know, as I say, didn't know the time, but he had a lovely long stride on him. He was a little bit green early on, that's fine. And, you know, he just strode out nicely, you know. Yeah, he's a little bit green there. But I bought plenty of winners from Thomond, and he steers you in the right direction. And, yeah, he's looking, I mean, that looks all right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, you wouldn't have said that was a slow time or something. Well, it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, we weren't buying a 5 furlong horse, but he had a nice old
lovely
long stride.
Yeah.
I mean, that for me, that ticks. Go back and see him after the breeze now. So you want to go and see him and make sure, well, not make sure, but just see if they're shinny or how they're jogging up, because Kingy does like to see a horse move well after they've breezed. You can forgive a little bit of sore shins, because I think when we bought Rainbow Dreamer for £6,000, who was a lovely old boy, and he's still running now at 10, he was shinny after and was a bit pottery after his breeze, and they couldn't sell him through the ring. They wanted 10 grand, and at the end of the sale, we gave him, poor old lad, we gave him 6. And he's been a heck of a horse, and he's still rated a good 100.
Yeah, and loves life on the weather.
So you do go and look at them after the breeze, just to see how, and then make your assessment. Obviously, if it's obvious it's shins, then you can forgive that, because you're not pushing to try and run them at Royal Ascot, so you can give them a little bit of time. As I say, going to Jamie McGee's or whatever. But anyway, when I saw this boy and he moved well after the breeze, there was obviously a little bit of cut in the ground, which was obviously a help for him there. And basically, that was sort of the night before the sale. Yeah, he's definitely on the list, but we just need to get the right team together. And David Hill, who loves to come to all the breeze up sales, an owner of Kingy's, was in charge of running the Barbary Lions syndicate. But we didn't feel this one was a Barbary Lions horse for a big syndicate, because they did need to have some action. So David put a separate little partnership together of 4 guys that were all definitely jumping men. And so they actually bought the horse, and then, you know, they obviously was trained as a 2-year-old, but then as a 3-year-old, it still looked like he would be a backward type, but he did look like he would run. And Barbary Lions didn't have they needed a new horse, a 3-year-old. So the 4 boys leased him to the Barbary Lions syndicate. So that's why he raced in the yellow and blue colours.
Early on.
Initially, and were owned by Barbary Lions. But actually, it was a lease thing. The syndicate didn't own that horse. The 4 guys still owned him. And then that was a 2-year, 3-year-old and 4-year-old career was in the Barbary Lions. And then their lease came up, finished, and that's when the 4 guys have owned him themselves now in their own right. But we put, because we did have it in our mind, he was more the bumper type of horse. And then Kingy said in the spring of the 3-year-old, no, I think I'll be able to run this as a 3-year-old. You know, he's good. Or did he run as a 2? Did he have 1 run as a 2-year-old? I can't remember now. But he was going to run as a flat horse a little bit. But the idea was to make him a jumper still, even in those periods. And then he was a big, tall horse. He grew, and suddenly I got him bigger. And they felt that juvenile hurdling wasn't the right thing for him at the end of his 3-year-old year. Give him a chance. And then it was always in the back of your mind he was going to go hurdling at some stage, but he just got a bit too good. When he won the Ascot, the big stayers, you know, the Champion Stayers, and when he was like 11 or 12 to 1 in that soft ground, that first one he'd won, that scuppered the job for hurdling for that winter, because you thought, oh my word. And then, you know, and he just kept popping up, winning a big one, and then you couldn't really risk him, really, I suppose, and if you're winning races worth 200 grand to the winner, why would you want to be going for a 4 grand race round Plumpton?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's been difficult because he's very ground dependent, so it kind of means that plans have to be sort of on pause a bit, but whatever. I just want to know what you mean when you say too good to go hurdling, because that's...
Well, it was because it's not too good to be hurdling. It's basically, if you can... I mean, that horse has won over £1 million. I mean, you've got to, you know, if you're going to be running for the Ascot Champion Stayers, and he's won it twice, and the Goodwood Cup, that's worth a fortune. These races are massive prize money. So why bottom him through the winter? And as I say, the only big race jumping is the Champion Hurdle, which is comparable, but equally, or a Stayers Hurdle, probably more likely. you don't need, if you've got those races in the summertime, you can't go both coal faces. So I say it's too good. It's because the dangle of the carrot on the flat is those huge prize money races, and regularly, not just once a year. They are, if the ground's not right for the Ascot Gold Cup, he can wait because he's got a 250 grand race at Goodwood. And this year it wasn't right at Royal Ascot. They went for the Northumberland Plate, and that's a valuable race in its own right, sort of thing. So, and then the Prix de Cadran, that's a valuable race. So you've got 3 or 4, 5 of these races that you just got to be a bit lucky that enough of the 5 will be in soft ground, and it's a proper compliment to Alan how he keeps that horse simmering, because he has to just and he's and last year they did chance him a little bit on better ground and he wasn't as good, and he's not a horse can take too much of that fast ground, so hopefully they'll stick rigidly to soft in the going description this season, because I don't think it really worked for the horse quite so well last year, but we'll see. He's just not, he doesn't quite let himself down as much on that ground, and because it just obviously jars him a little bit, And he's an older boy now, and he feels his aches and pains like we all do. Yeah.
Well, but when he's a proper battles, isn't he? He really does that. What he did at Ascot last at the end of last year. I suppose the approach you had then, it wanted to turn into find a nice jumper or national hunt horse, as you wrote down on your page. When you went back the next year, do you think, oh gosh, I could try and find another long middle distance to Stayer type, or is it always we can still find a good national hunt horse, but it's just the way that they turn out to be? If they're too good, that's fine.
Yeah. No, I mean it's you're trying to. We like to buy an athlete. We try to buy. It's actually. I mean, that horse was like a store, really, but he'd been, but he was doing stuff as a 2-year-old, so it ticks all boxes, win-win. Because we're quite happy to be those 4 guys were patient. They were happy to buy that horse and sit on it if it needed to be. But the horse came to hand and showed him something. His class came through, didn't it? But it's still not. It's still the breeze ups are still a yearling sale in my book. Mm-hmm. It's still all about the individual primarily. For me, I still want to buy a horse I really like. That's what Alan and I, it's like a store sale. It's like, you've got some extra evidence to help you back it up. You can see them galloping and stuff like that, and you can check their wind, and you can check, and you've actually, the horse has, been trained, so you can, see the soundness angle of him as well. These are all great bonuses, but it's still a yearling or a store type situation. You still want to see a nice, easy walk-in, correct looking colt coming towards you that you think you can train and get years of service out of. And case in point, Chatez ran till he's 8 or 9 on the flat, and Rainbow Dreamer's still doing it at 10, and I think Trueshan's going to keep going for years. That's to do with the individual and the conformation.
Yeah.
Those, they can take the training.
Yeah, so to the point that Richard Brown made last week was that they've already jumped through these hoops. They've obviously got the mind to be able to get them there, and that does give them maybe that longevity that some just aren't really made for. Well, if you've got crooked legs, I think it puts more pressure on your joints and your knees, and they don't last as long. Is my feeling on it. They might have a V12 engine inside them, but if the wheels are about on the scrap heap, then that's not so good. The wheels have got to take the engine, Yeah. Okay, well, from Trueshan, I'd like to go to another one that you've also had success with, but actually had turned into a decent, both dual-purpose horse, and that's Tritonic. And I've read a quote from you, Antti, saying that he's the poster boy for what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what was, at the time, 146, a chestnut colt by See the Moon. What did you see? Right,
well, See the Moon was definitely on my hit list. He was as a sire to, whether or not he'd had runners by then, I'm not sure, but he was certainly a sire, certainly ticked all the boxes for me. He was hugely impressive, winner of Grade 1s, Group 1s in Germany as a racehorse, and in soft ground, and he was a See the Stars, and he was definitely a sire on my radar that I was keen to get involved with if we liked one. And I saw this horse, and I loved this horse, and Kingy agreed with me, and we, I can say it now, but we were going to buy this horse for a good bit more than what we paid for him on this one. I don't normally say that afterwards. Well, I can say it now, it's got a good few years on, but I hate people saying, oh, I had a bit more than that, oh, why was it so cheap? I wasn't saying that, but equally, this was a horse we really were revved on. And I knew we had, and we got Max McNeil on the phone. If we needed the big guns, we had him ready to go in. And this horse excited Kingy and I. We did think he'd be a flat horse, but he was a lovely horse. He just had size and scope and the looks and the bone and the walk, but he didn't look like he wasn't like Trueshan that you thought, oh, you're going to be a bump horse. No, you thought this might be a 2-year-old later on, and he was. I think he won. Did he win the Haynes, Hanson and Clark?
Yes, yeah.
So proper horse. I think they went one step. I think he went around in the Zetland and was like 4th or something like that at the end of the season. But probably that might have been just 1, 2. Wasn't quite ready for that moment. But he got beat a short head or something in a photo at Royal Ascot the next year as a 3-year-old. I mean, he was, yeah, as I say, poster boy, because then he comes out and then Adonis and a Greatwood, and he's still 102 flat rated now. And 150 rated hurdler. This was a poster boy. It's a good phrase. I didn't know as I said that, but that's a good one.
What would I'd just like, because you obviously said that you probably would have bought him anyway, regardless if he was going around a ring without the breeze. But I'd just like to know, just from the purpose, from a breeze up perspective, were you? And we'll look at it now. I'm not sure when you last saw this.
No.
You've seen him walk around. He's a lovely model. What did you make of this?
So he's going. Well, as with all the Rogers, they know their job. They're going straight. He's got his head okay. I haven't got a slap. Who's riding that? Is that Robson? I think that's Robson might be riding that. Robson Aguiar.
He rides all the good ones.
Yeah, but he's got a big long stride on him, and look, that's coming one way. If we can afford him, we can have him. That's what our thinking was. He's a lovely old stride on him, isn't he?
Yeah.
No, he was a horse, and actually King and I quite like a chestnut. Anyway, we're quite keen on chestnuts.
Yeah.
He hasn't got as much white as some of them we buy, but yeah.
So excited you because he's sort of ticking a lot of the boxes?
Every time you got him out to go and have a look at him, we went and looked at him quite a few times, and he just came out and just sold himself to us, really. But he had a bit of size and scope about him. He'd have been a big. He looks big, doesn't he? There.
Yeah.
I mean, he was. He'd have been over 16 hands, sort of 2-year-old.
So he's obviously been the ultimate the project that you had put in place between you and Kingy, and come good because you do exactly what a dual-purpose horse is meant to do.
Yeah.
Do it both ways. How difficult is it to obviously see these horses and think the same? Do they come around that often? Do you see them even at the yearling sales, or is it something about giving them a bit more time that the breeze ups can offer you that?
I don't know, really. Yeah, you just know when you like a horse, don't you? Really, and it's you can love a yearling, and then you walk in and it makes 300,000, and the Arabs have bought it, and you think, it's a bit embarrassing to have had the fella on the phone for that one. So you just stick to your criteria and look, price. Budget, as I say, I was always going to buy it. No, I wasn't always going to buy it, but I was going to give more than I had to give. I agree. You fall in love with a horse, but if your budget isn't there, your budget isn't there. So that's what happens at sales, really. So you just have to go with what happened. The price can take it out of your range quite easily.
So that's why, with the 55,000 guinea 2-year-olds as he ended up being, that's what the breeze up can offer you, because it is all those boxes, but it's also the value that you need.
Someone wasn't looking for that type of horse. They weren't looking for a 3-year-old type at that sale, perhaps. Perhaps Seam of the Moon wasn't. That's always a funny thing on the flat. I can never work out how some sires are in and some are out. I mean, that's just, it's done me great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, yearlings, breeze ups, whatever. You buy a horse and you think, well, I don't know why that was so cheap, and then everyone's telling all the experts are telling me, oh, you couldn't have bought one by, and well, like for the last couple of years, Havana Gold. They all, oh, not Havana Gold. Well, mate, I bought Chipotle for 10 grand, and and Streets of Gold for 27 or something, and they're still telling you, oh, you wouldn't buy one of those Havana Gold. Well, all right. I mean, and we were buying those after he'd already had Havana Grey in his first crop. So it's so funny how you can walk into a yearling sale or a breeze sale, and people haven't looked at it because of the sire. And they're proven sires more often than not. So, because I quite like using proven sires, because the unproven sires seem to, the experts get very excited about the prices of an untried horse. Yeah. But it's quite straightforward, really, isn't it? I mean, if you You know, the untried ones work commercially for people to pinhook because no one's trained a bad one by that stallion. All they can remember is him winning at Royal Ascot, the actual racehorse. But that's, you know, it's very unlikely a sire's going to actually sire anything as good as himself anyway. So forget about him winning at Royal Ascot. You've got to, I'd rather see them getting a load of winners and go and buy them the next year when they're cheaper, seemingly. You know, the yearlings, there's very few sires seem to go up in their yearling averages after they've had runners. There's only about one or two stallions a year.
Yeah. So do you use any of your insight that you take from the National Hunt game with proven sires and things like that?
Well, I think we do. I think I do. I think I must. Because I don't spend very much on the flat horses, and the strike rate's quite good. And I don't know quite why that is, but actually when I think about it, it's because I don't go with the crowd, because I don't really know what is supposedly fashionable and what isn't really. I just buy what I like. And it's, as I say, I still look at it, a sale as if they weren't ridden, just as a store sale or as a yearling sale, and I just look at the individual. Now, I'm not going to buy, if I want to buy a sprinter for someone, for Eve, I'm not going to show her a 16-2 yearling that looks like it's going to need 2 years. Yeah, you know, you've got to have, you know, I remember buying Kingsgate Native years ago, and he won the Nunthorpe as a 2-year-old, and no one gave me any credit for it at all. They said, well, that was a bit of a mistake. No, I wasn't buying it to be a jumper. Yeah. I was buying it to be a fast horse, but that didn't create any...
You can do everything.
No, but at that time, you see, because that was around the time of Quarto Star and all that stuff, so I was more known for the jumps. And to meet a flute, a Nunthorpe winner, was sort of, you know, I must have made a mistake, but I hadn't. But because common sense is, if you're buying a sprinter, you're going to look for a different type of individual, aren't you, you know?
I see it as transferable skills.
Yeah, really. I still actually, I won't buy a poor walker. I just won't. And I know, but not every sprinter has to be a great walker. I mean, but although saying that, last year I made a point of going down to the July Cup pre-parade, and every single one of those was a really good walker, and that made me a bit more happier with life, because I've always been told, oh, you can forgive it, it's got a sprinter's walk, you can forgive that. But I do like to see a horse really use himself, because, you know, it's economy of movement keeps the petrol going in. You know, you don't have to put so much petrol in, you know. Yeah. So I don't know. I always think it's a very important factor of it. So
that's the one factor that you'll find in every single Highflyer bought horse.
Pretty much. I'd say I've made a mistake. I've missed something. If it's not, they've got to be a really athletic moving horse. Mm-hmm. Some horses with poor looking hocks can look like they're a good walker, but they're not. They've got poor conformation. But anyway, but a good walker is definitely, and pretty much like to find a pretty correct in front as well. Because I want that horse to last as long as it can, and it definitely helps them if they're correct through the knees. If you can.
The longevity speaks itself with the ones we've looked at. I was going to look at Making Me Do It, but instead of doing that, and I'd want to ask more about her sire, because she's a filly that you bought again very well, 10,000 guineas at the Breeze Ups by Golden Horn. Now you've talked about sires that you were like interested in, want to follow that, See the Moon. Golden Horn is you obviously selected as, I'd imagine, in the same vein, a horse that you were very keen to see for this kind of type of project horse as well. Yeah,
well, Golden Horn's first crops were too expensive. I couldn't get near them, really. You know, he came in with a big, high-profile, high-covering fee. But he was a sire you thought, oh, you'd like them. And they were nice, and this and the other. And he actually, his first crops, he was really getting a lot of stakes horses, and again, it was still hard to get them bought by Golden Horn, but he was always a stallion on my radar. And luckily, the last couple of years, I've managed to get a few of them as they sort of became a little bit more viable. And yeah, Making Me Do It, she was from the Breeze Ups. And then I bought Nusret, who's been a nice horse. He's now a 4-year-old, same as Making Me Do It. We've got your horse in Maxud, who you know, another sire, another one by the side that's, you know, he's proper horse, group placed, and there's some others as well. I bought a load of yearlings by him last year as well, and they still weren't that expensive. I don't know why it is. They've sort of missed the market's misread this horse. He's a decent sire, and I think he's a right good find for the jumping market, actually, to have got him, to keep him in British breeding, And I know they've got about 200 mares to him this year. And there will be some flat mares amongst those. He can get a good horse.
So if you saw him at the Breeze Ups again, and are there any others outside of him, especially from a Breeze Up perspective, that you look forward to seeing come this new bunch of horses that you'll be following in?
Oh, well, sires for this year. Well, he's a new sire, but study of man.
Yeah.
I liked some of his yearlings last year. There's no reason why he couldn't just be he'd be a sort of sire of the new sires, just to keep a little eye on. And I'm always sort of, old Sir Percy was never done me any harm over the years. I mean, Scarlet Dragon, I bought him as a yearling, but if it was Sir Percy, I'd always give him a bit of, for an old boy. Yeah. I mean, they don't make very much money, and he gets heaps of winners.
Yeah.
But yeah, there'll be Highland Real. He might be a little bit dual purposey coming, and I wouldn't mind looking at one or two of those possibly. But actually, funny enough, in the last years we bought quite a few Kodiaks, and that's not really a sire of jumpers, but that's ultimately, first and foremost, I said, plan A is to have a good flat horse for these orders. It's only occasional when you'll say, well, this one's more of a jumps one, like we actually thought Trueshan was. So a Kodiak with size and scope, we're happy with that. We got a nice 4-year-old this year with Kingy called Paradise that he purposely kept back and didn't hurdle him this winter because we think he's got a big handicap in him on the flat, and he's rated about 90 going into this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he's over 100 by this time next year, So yeah. Yeah.
So end of the day, there's the Breeze Ups can offer Anthony Bromley still the versatility, the opportunities, and the value.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly these horses are all sort of, Paradise was a bit more expensive, but most of these are under 50, 55 grand, which in this day and age to get you a nice horse, that's good value. Yeah.
Well, brilliant. Well, it's been fascinating looking back at your success stories, hearing more about your insights for the Breeze Ups, and all we can say is best of luck for this season.